The bride tripped over the threshold of Ulverton Hall, sent a footman's tray of glasses crashing across the marble, and stood in the wreckage with her cheeks scarlet and her wedding veil askew, and the Duke of Ulverton, who had not smiled in 7 years, felt the corner of his mouth twitch once before he could stop it, and was so startled by the sensation that he forgot to be grim. It was the first thing his new wife did in his house. It would not, he would learn, be the last. Ambrose, 6th Duke of Ulverton, had married her without laying eyes on her but twice. It had been arranged in the cold and sensible way such things were arranged among great families. His ancient title wanted an heir, her respectable family wanted the connection, and the Duke had agreed to it with the same grey indifference he brought to everything now, because it made no difference to him whom he married, since he had already buried the only person he had ever loved. Her name was Prudence Tilney. She was warm and round-faced and hopelessly clumsy, and she had, the Duke gathered from the reports, a reputation in her own county for being kind to everyone and graceful to no one, and he had thought, reading of her, that she would do as well as any other, that she would live in one wing of his vast silent house and he in another, and they would meet at dinner and produce in time the heir the title required, and otherwise leave one another to the peace of their separate griefs and their separate rooms. He had not accounted for Prudence Tilney. The trouble began, as the tray had, at once. His household had run for 7 years on silence and shadow. The Duke had lost his first wife, Eleanor, to a winter fever in the 2nd year of a marriage that had been briefly and completely everything he had ever wanted, and he had never recovered, had never intended to recover, had draped the whole of Ulverton in the black of his mourning and let it stay there. The curtains were kept half-drawn, the great rooms were kept shut, the servants moved on soft feet and spoke in murmurs. No music was played, no flowers were cut. The Duke of Ulverton had built himself a mausoleum and lived in it, alone, for 7 years, and he had liked it that way, or told himself he had. And then Prudence tripped over the threshold, and within a week the mausoleum was under siege. She could not help it. That was the maddening thing. She did not set out to disturb his grief. She was, he could see, genuinely a little afraid of him and tried her best to be quiet and small and unobtrusive, and failed utterly, because she was constitutionally incapable of it. She knocked over a vase in the long gallery and, mortified, tried to catch it, and knocked over 2 more. She got lost in the vast house and turned up, flushed and apologizing, in rooms that had been sealed for years, and threw open their curtains to find her way, and let the light come flooding into places that had not seen the sun since Eleanor died. She befriended the servants, could not help that either, and within a fortnight the soft-footed, murmuring staff of Ulverton were, to the Duke's astonishment, laughing again in the kitchens, because the new Duchess had dropped a whole basin of flour over herself, trying to learn to make bread, and had laughed at herself first and hardest. The Duke of Ulverton watched all of this from behind the wall of his grief, and told himself he disapproved, and found that he could not quite manage it. "You have opened the curtains in the blue drawing-room," he said to her one evening at dinner, the long, silent dinners at the 2 ends of a table built for 40, which she endured, he could tell, with the bewildered patience of a warm creature aged in the cold. "Oh," said Prudence, and went scarlet. "Oh, I am sorry. I got turned about. This house is so very large, your grace. I have not learned my way, and it was dark and I could not find the bell, so I opened them to see, and then I am afraid I forgot to close them again. I will see to it." "I am so sorry. Leave them," said the Duke. She blinked at him. "Your grace." "Leave them open," he said again, and did not know why he said it, and was as surprised as she was. "The room is improved by the light. Leave them." Prudence beamed at him, a wide, sudden, uncomplicated beam that lit her whole round face, and the Duke of Ulverton looked down at his plate very quickly and did not smile back, though the corner of his mouth twitched again, and he was troubled about it for the rest of the meal. She was not clever in the way his first wife had been clever. Eleanor had been quick and cool and elegant, and the Duke had loved her sharpness and her wit. Prudence was nothing like that. Prudence was warm in a way that was almost clumsy in itself. She said the wrong thing constantly, blurted out her feelings, laughed too loudly, wept too easily at a sad story or a kindness, and moved through the world, leaving a trail of small disasters and large affections behind her. She was, the Duke thought, the least suitable duchess imaginable for a house of grief. And yet the house of grief was changing around her day by day, whether he willed it or no. The flowers came first. She began to cut them. She loved the neglected gardens and set the old gardeners, delighted, to reviving them. And she filled the sealed rooms with them, great clumsy overflowing armfuls of them, and the smell of them crept through the whole house and undid, a little, the smell of dust and closed doors. Then the music. She played the pianoforte badly, with more feeling than skill, and she did it in the evenings in the long gallery, not knowing the Duke could hear it, and he found himself standing in the dark of the corridor, outside more than once, listening to his silent house fill with imperfect, living sound for the first time in 7 years, and not going in, and not stopping her. And then, one grey afternoon in the 3rd month of their strange marriage, she found the room he had never opened. It was Eleanor's room. He had sealed it the day she died and never entered it since. A bright morning room at the east of the house where she had liked to sit, kept exactly as she had left it, her books on the table, her work-basket by the window, a portrait of her over the mantel. It was the heart of the mausoleum, the one room where his grief was kept whole and undisturbed, and it was locked, and no servant of Ulverton would have dreamed of touching it. But Prudence, exploring, had found the key in a forgotten drawer and, not knowing what the room was, had opened it. And the Duke of Ulverton, coming upon the open door where there had never been an open door, felt 7 years of carefully kept grief rise up in him like a wave, and strode into the room prepared to be, for the first time in their marriage, truly and coldly angry. He stopped in the doorway. Prudence was standing before the portrait of Eleanor, and she was weeping. Not the noisy, easy weeping he had grown used to. This was quiet and terrible, and she had not heard him come in. She stood before the painted face of the woman she had replaced. This warm, clumsy girl who filled the house with flowers. She was too poor at arranging and music, she was too poor at playing, and she wept as though her heart would break, and when she spoke it was to the portrait, in a small broken voice. And the Duke stood frozen in the doorway and heard every word. "I am so sorry," Prudence whispered to the painted face. "I did not know this was your room. I would never. I am so sorry. I know I am not you. I know he loved you. Everyone knows he loved you. And I know I am only a clumsy, foolish thing they married to him because they wanted an heir. And I do try to be quiet and not to disturb him. But I am no good at it. I have never been any good at it." She pressed her hand to her mouth. "I did not mean to fall in love with him. I know I have no right. He does not want me, and why should he, when he had you? I only wanted to make him a little less sad. That is all I ever wanted. I would give anything, anything at all, only to see him smile once, even if it were never at me. I am sorry. I am so sorry I came into your room." The Duke of Ulverton stood in the doorway and could not move and could not speak, and something that had been frozen solid in his chest for 7 years cracked, all at once, straight down the middle. For he had thought, all this while, that his grief was the deepest thing in the house. He had thought his mourning was a kind of faithfulness, a monument, the last thing he could give the wife he had lost. And here was this warm, foolish girl, who had every reason to resent the dead woman whose shadow she lived in, standing before her portrait and weeping not for herself, but for him, a painted ghost's forgiveness, wanting nothing in the world but to make him a little less sad, loving him without hope of being loved in return. And the Duke understood in that cracked open moment that Eleanor, his Eleanor, who had been warm herself and generous, and had laughed easily and loved life, would not have wanted a mausoleum. She would have been grieved by it. She would have looked at what he had made of her memory, all this dust and darkness, and been sorry. And she would have looked at Prudence Tilney weeping before her portrait for the sake of his happiness, and she would have loved her. "Prudence," he said. She spun around, white with horror, her hand flying to her mouth. "Your Grace, I did not hear you. I am so sorry. I will go. I never meant t," he said, and his voice was not cold, and it stopped her. He came into the room, the sealed room, into which he had not stepped in 7 years, and it did not undo him as he had feared it would, and he came to stand before her, this clumsy wall who loved him, and he looked at her tear-stained face and felt the last of the ice break apart and fall away. "You said you wished only to see me smile," he said low. "Once, even if never at you." He shook his head slowly, and something was working in his own throat now. You foolish, generous, extraordinary woman, do you not understand what you have done? You have walked into the coldest house in England and filled it with flowers I told myself I did not want, and music I stood in the dark to hear, and light I could not bring myself to close out again. You have made my servants laugh. You have made me, his voice caught, you have made me feel, for the first time in 7 years, that a person might live in this house and not merely mourn in it. I have been so certain that grief was the truest thing left in me. And then you came and tripped over my threshold, and I felt my own face try to smile before I had decided to let it, and I have been fighting it ever since, because I thought I owed my grief my whole life. He drew a breath. I do not think I do. I do not think she would have wished it. I think she would have looked at you, Prudence, and known you for exactly what you are, which is the warmest heart I have ever encountered, and I think she would have told me not to be a fool. Prudence stared up at him, tears standing in her eyes, not daring to believe. You are not angry that I opened her room. I am grateful you opened it, he said. I have not been able to for 7 years. You did it in an afternoon, with a lost key and a good heart, and you have let the light into it, which is the only fit thing to do to it. And I should have done it long ago. And then the Duke of Ulverton looked down at his warm and clumsy wife, standing in the light of his first wife's room, and he did the thing she had asked the portrait for, the thing she had said she would give anything to see, the thing he had not done in 7 years. He smiled. It came slowly, and it changed his whole grave face, and Prudence made a small sound, half a laugh and half a sob, as though she had not truly believed it possible until she saw it. And the Duke, feeling the strange, unpracticed joy of it, smiled wider, and reached out and gently wiped a tear from her round cheek with his thumb, and said, "There, you have had your wish. Though I find I would rather it were at you after all and always for the rest of my life, if you will have a grim old widower who has forgotten how, and is only now, thanks to you, remembering. I would have you," Prudence whispered, "if you never smiled again in your life. But oh, I am so glad you did." The mausoleum ended that day. The Duke of Ulverton had the curtains thrown open in every room, and Eleanor's morning room made bright and used and loved again, her portrait kept with honour, but her memory let out at last into the living air. Prudence filled the whole great house with her flowers and her terrible pianoforte and her laughter, and the servants ceased to whisper, and Ulverton, which had been a tomb, became a home. She remained hopelessly clumsy to the end of her days. She never learned to arrange a vase, and she tripped over the same threshold at least once a season, and she said the wrong thing at grand dinners with a regularity that became, in the county, a kind of beloved legend. But the Duke of Ulverton would not have altered one graceless thing about her for all the elegance in England, because he had lived 7 years in a house of perfect, silent, immaculate grief, and it had very nearly killed him. And it was a clumsy, warm-hearted girl who had tripped over his threshold and shattered it and given him back his life. "You are staring again," she told him years on, looking up from the pianoforte where she was murdering a sonata with tremendous feeling. "I am," said the Duke of Ulverton, who now smiled a great deal, and most of all at her. "I have 7 silent years to make up for my love, and I intend to do it entirely by watching you knock things over. Play on. You are the finest sound this house has ever known." And she laughed, and knocked her music to the floor, reaching to swat at him, and he laughed too, the sound of it still a small miracle in those halls, and bent to gather up the scattered pages, and thought, as he did every day of the long, bright life she gave him, that grief had built him a tomb, and love, arriving in a crooked veil over a tray of broken glass, had knocked it cheerfully to the ground.